it's hard to get people to believe that it wasn't a suicide attempt.
Pat Young was in despair that she would ever be able to resolve the difficulties in her marriage. And so she shot herself and went to hell.
I knew it had to be something that would be drastic enough to put me in the hospital, but not drastic enough to kill me. So I didn't do my torso because I didn't want to do any serious damage. So I thought if it went in one side of my neck and out the other side, that would be bad enough to put me there, not bad enough to keep me there. I had no idea I would die. I was in a coma for 3 days on life support. They were positive I wasn't going to live. They had informed the family that they had lost too much blood. It started out with these little beings, child-sized creatures, grotesque, absolutely grotesque little creatures. And they took great delight in doing things. They would make holes in me. They would either shoot me or they would make holes by actually hitting me. And in these holes they would put horrible things, anything that was excrement, vomit, bile, anything that was absolutely obnoxious. And these holes were everywhere. They would put them in my body, in my arm, in my cheek, in my eye socket. And you can't do anything. And you're extremely ill from it. But you can't get sick. I wasn't able to even gag. And you can't feel the pain, but you can feel and you can smell. And just beyond my right shoulder, I could hear this very heavy, raspy breathing, and it was getting closer. And I couldn't turn to see, and I didn't want to see. But I knew that as soon as it got within my range of view, that what I had gone through up till then was absolutely nothing. It was absolute pure evil of some sort that was coming. And at the very last second, when I knew the very next instant it would be within my range of view, I opened my eyes and I was alive.
Tom Harper, Rhodes Scholar, theologian, and journalist, found when he was researching his book Life After Death that most people who have undergone near-death experiences claim to have at least started on the path to heaven. But there are others for whom the experience turned intensely negative. Hellish, in other words.
Not long ago, my wife and I attended a church service in which the preacher declared in no uncertain terms that only those born again in Jesus would be spared eternal damnation. Afterwards, I told him I thought he had a rather narrow view of heaven and hell. "I do indeed, brother," he thundered at me. "I do indeed." It was obvious he felt we were headed in different directions.
Maurice Rawlings, a cardiologist in Knoxville, Tennessee, has been on the front line in operating rooms where he has seen numerous people die and revive. He says we are not hearing about negative near-death experiences because no one wants to admit they've been to hell and back.
Unless you're on the floor with the patient resuscitating, at the time, the heat of battle, at the time of their experience, why are you fighting me off, John? What do you see? Is there fire down there? Is the devil there? What's there? Then it all comes out. It's not sublimated into painless portions of the memory. You've caught them red-handed. They can't deny it. It's there. The negative experiences are always been there. They just haven't been captured because the psychologists, psychiatrists that interview these patients for a living, collecting cases of after-death experiences, haven't resuscitated one of the individuals they're reporting. How is somebody going to report a negative experience when they won't even tell their family? It's an F on the report card.
Ron Ron Regan spent a good part of his early life stealing, extorting, and beating people up, until the unlucky day he came out at the bottom end of a fight, slashed by a bottle and bleeding to death in an ambulance.
And I didn't know what was happening. I thought the ambulance was on fire. And as it filled with thick black smoke, moving through the thick black cloud, almost like a opening in this thick blackness. And at some point I began to hear screams. Multitudes of people screaming and wailing. And the best way I can describe it is it looked like a volcanic crater. And I could see like a huge lake inside this. But it was blazing with fire. I'd never seen anything like this, with the exception of hundreds of gallons of gasoline poured on the surface of water and ignited. But even worse than the sight, I began to see and to know that these voices were coming from those flames. And then I began to see bodies, silhouettes of human beings screaming, on fire, burning, but they weren't burning up. They were in an inferno of flames, but they weren't burning up. And they were screaming, and the smell, if you've ever smelled burning flesh, it was unbearable. And the screams were unbearable, but the most horrible thing was the pain, the emotional pain of loneliness and separation. And I saw other people, and they're saying, Ronnie, don't come here. There's no way out.
Ron Regan became a Christian minister, preaching the gospel from his own experience.
Well, I have nothing against becoming a Christian minister. After all, I became one myself. But I have to admit that many researchers in the field of paranormal experience see these kinds of claims as culturally determined.
We die the life we live. That the events of our own life are replayed when we die, and that our own religious beliefs and culture is mirrored back and reflected to us in the type of dying experience that we have. So it should not come as any surprise then that people who report hellish experiences are primarily fundamentalist Christians who have a deep belief in hell.
To other people, the mere idea is absurd.
It worries me that most NDE reports are coming from the States, where there is this underlying Christian belief about heaven and hell.
People like author Susan Blackmore, once a parapsychologist herself, but now a debunker of myths about the afterlife.
I think there may be people who have had unpleasant NDEs, frightening NDEs, who don't dare talk about it because they feel, oh, that must mean I'm a bad person, and so they're really, really frightened, and live with a kind of guilt that there must be something they've done wrong. If the truth is that it's just the luck of the draw, what the situation they were in and the chemicals in their brain at the time that produced this hellish NDE, they are suffering guilt for nothing, a remorse for nothing, bad feelings for nothing. And therefore I think the sooner we can understand these things properly, the sooner we can help people like that see that it's not their fault that they had a hellish NDE.
Psychiatrist Dr. Stanislav Grof, who has spent a lifetime studying altered states, speculates that hell may in fact exist in another dimension of time and space.
I see this as a real contact with the archetypal domain that has kind of independent existence, but somehow touches upon that. If you look at the images of hells from different cultures, you'll see the different tortures that are being experienced there. You can see the nooses, the strangling, you can see the pitchforks, the spits, the sharp pains, people cooking or being cooked in cauldrons and so on. To experience anything sort of extreme emotional and physical states. When we think about heaven as it is described in spiritual scriptures, not as a powerful inner archetypal experience, but as the physical heaven, then we come to such conclusions that we have disproved the existence of angels and God because we have explored systematically the astronomical heavens and we haven't seen any of those entities. Or if we know that there is heated nickel and iron as the core of the earth, that there is no place for caves of Satan, that cannot be hell there. So the idea is to get to hell or to heaven, you change your consciousness. So somebody can be here with us and be in heaven or hell, while everybody else is in Mill Valley. Those two are not incompatible in any way. So those are very, very real experiences, and they have to be studied by consciousness research. There's nothing that you can say reasonably about heaven or hell coming from physics or coming from biology or coming from medicine, because we are talking about states of mind.
Of course, the tortures of hell are not quite the same to all people, not even to all artists. To some, they are good for a last laugh. As that old atheist Voltaire lay on his deathbed, an ever-hopeful priest tried to convince him to recant. At the very least, to forswear the devil. Voltaire shook his head. "Is this any time to be making new enemies?" he murmured.
Most people seem to crave for evidence of life after death. And I think this is quite natural because we spend our lives almost being taught that we matter. You know, I must get a bigger car, a bigger bank balance, I must have people love me and approve of me, I must be nice to them so they'll like me. All of these things are me, me, me. In a way, that's the root of all our suffering. I mean, that's what makes us miserable and disappointed and feeling a failure and so on. And I think it's also what drives the desire for me to carry on forever. Because what's all this been for if I'm not going to carry on and reap rewards somewhere or another? Also, there's the question of suffering. It seems sort of to give an answer to the problem of all the suffering around us if we think that somewhere people will get their just desserts. I personally don't think any of that's true, because I don't think there is a little me in here who matters.
After researching a number of the life reviews, I was amazed to discover my own prejudice as a member of this culture, that we tend to look in terms of up, down. You're a good girl, you're a bad girl. You're a sheep, you're a goat. You go to heaven, you go to hell. That there's a paradigm of opposites that may not, in fact, be true. So, is there a hell? I don't think so. Have we focused more on the blissful near-death experiences rather than the others? Absolutely. We have to wonder why wonderful scholarship has discovered that medieval near-death experiencers saw lakes of fire, frightening folks, and then saw the bliss at the end. And contemporary near-death experiences are almost unilaterally blissful. You have to wonder if it's because we live in a society that doesn't want to be accountable for its wrongdoing and doesn't want to admit that there may be a darker side to life. I think those issues are real, and I think we need to encourage people who have had scary experiences to come forward.
We create our own heaven and hell. It's all relative. And in terms of heaven, it's when we feel good, we're in heaven, and when we're in the pits, we're in hell.
L'enfer, ça serait un endroit où on doit continuer on continue à être entouré de gens qui ne savent pas s'assumer. On est entouré d'hypocrisie, de mensonges, de pensées négatives.
I mean, if heaven is defined as we're all part of a much larger being, then hell is sort of not being completely at peace with that sort of thought. So it's an internal thing as opposed to an external thing.
L'entour et l'enfer serait vraiment un endroit où la sensualité ne se développerait pas du tout, ne s'épanouirait pas du tout, mais au contraire, la partie la plus basse et la plus mauvaise de l'homme se contenterait d'exister.
There are other hells beside the traditional Christian one. Darkness, void, vacuum, loneliness, absence, nothingness, non-existence.
What I knew was that I was outside of the hospital, going into the sky.
Nancy, you never existed. You never will exist.
35 years ago, Nancy Evans Bush may have experienced the kind of hell referred to by Stan Groff when something went terribly wrong during childbirth. She has been trying to make sense of what happened ever since.
You're not real. You never existed. Nothing you ever knew existed. You're not real.
You never existed. You never will exist. Nor does anyone you think you ever knew, nor your life, nor where you live. You made it all up. You were allowed to make it up. Which meant that not only did I not exist, I remember saying telepathically, but the baby doesn't exist. Her year-old sister doesn't exist. Your mother, your husband, nobody you know exists. You're not real. And nothing you know is real. I've called it instant Holocaust.
Nancy believes she has come to terms with the hell she experienced so many years ago. But what about those people whose near-death experiences threw them into hell and who found no hope, no redemption, no promise of anything better, who came back to this life with the sense that all they have to look forward to is perpetual misery?
There is a gift in these experiences. Now, it's not a gift we want to get. But if we're stubborn enough, and for some of us this is the only benefit we've ever found for our stubbornness, but if we hang in there, we work through a lot of issues. We come to discover our religious faith in incredibly deep ways that we couldn't if we just kind of dazzled around on the happy level. So what I'm trying to do is go beyond just the idea of pain equals bad equals punishment equals hell equals eternity equals despair. Because the alternative to despair, I think, is joy, which is different than happiness. But the paradoxical nature of this is that in order to get to real joy, we have to be able to accept suffering as part of it. And I know that sounds bizarre, but I didn't make up the rules. And it just seems to work that way.
In many ways, the concept of hell is the most difficult of all ideas of the afterlife for contemporary people to deal with. All of us have had moments of pure happiness or supreme exaltation about which we can truly say it was heaven. But hell is a different story. When we say something was hell, we don't mean it in quite the same way. Implicit in our idea of hell is the potential and the need to be released from it. When they made a movie about the most decorated soldier of World War II, they called it To Hell and Back. As far as I know, nobody's ever made a movie simply called To Hell, which is probably what's most nerve-wracking about hellish NDEs, that uncertainty about escape. Nancy Evans Bush, like any believing Christian, finds reason in her experience by affirming that only through suffering comes ultimate joy. But what if, as some hellish NDEs seem to demonstrate, it doesn't? A troubling question. And to be candid at this point, until more research into hellish NDEs has been done, I'm perfectly content not to know the answer.